Healthcare is changing, and Dr. Nancy RN is here for you. The topics are many, but each program stands on its own with 3 key action points for you to learn. Your guide to a healthier you in a changing world. Dr. Nancy RN.
Welcome to Dr. Nancy RN, Healthy World, Healthy Nation, Healthy You. I'm Nancy Valentine, PhD and registered nurse, and this show is dedicated to you, the healthcare consumer. And our topic today is sleep, or sleep deprivation, which means lack of sleep or not enough sleep. And we have to understand that sleep is really important to our health. It guides our health, our physical, our emotional, our psychological well-being. It also has implications for chronic health issues and illness, so that if you don't get enough sleep, this contributes to your lack of progress if you have a chronic illness. We're going to be talking about a special kind of sleep problem today. We're going to be talking about sleep texting. Now, you may not have heard of this term before, but we're going to talk to you about what it is and how it plays itself out, particularly among young people. So our title of our show today is Sleep Texting, the health consequences of this new phenomena for young people that contributes to their sleep deprivation, which of course we want to avoid, because if we can help young people start with good sleep habits, this will really help them throughout their whole life. And we have a very special guest with us today who's a national expert in this field, Dr. Elizabeth Burgess-Dowdell, who is a nursing professor at Villanova University, and she's been there for 17 years doing nursing research in pediatric cases. And her interests are extremely relevant to today's world because she is looking into not only sleep texting, but all these gadgets that we have and how they either contribute or detract from our health and wellness. But today she's going to start with this topic of sleep texting. So I want to welcome you, Elizabeth, and thank you for spending time with us today.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start with that term, sleep texting. I didn't even know of this term until I met you, Elizabeth, because you really helped me to understand it. So tell our guests what sleep texting is.
Well, sleep texting is what you would think it is. It's texting in your sleep. It's when you are going into sleep or coming out of sleep or in a nap state, and the buzz or the beep or the noise goes off on the machine, the cell phone, and you pick up the cell phone and start to text. And they're answering texts and sending texts. And these tend to be 5, 6 messages back and forth. Then it stops. They go into a deeper sleep. The individual wakes up and they have no memory that they have sleep texted. They don't know who they've talked to, who they haven't talked to, and they don't understand until they check their history or somebody says, hey, you sent me something that didn't make sense. That's sleep texting.
Now, is this a new form of sleepwalking? I mean, how does this fit into other people's issues around things that they do when they're asleep that they don't remember?
Well, it's very common to do stuff in your sleep that you don't remember, like the sleepwalking or answering the landline. Back in the day when we had landlines, we'd answer it. We'd invite somebody to the house on Friday and we wouldn't even remember. So it is very similar to that. The concern, however, is that this is interrupting sleep, and it's not just a one-time episode. They're sending 3, 4, 5, 7 texts back and forth. So it is a prolonged interruption of sleep that is concerning, and it's in an age group where they're not getting enough sleep, and that's a health concern when we're looking at trying to keep adolescents, young adults healthy.
Now, this is a pretty unique area in terms of research. How did you get involved with this? Were you observing young people's sleep texting? You thought, oh, this is interesting. I think I'll look into this further.
I fell into it in many respects. I have the good fortune to have been funded since 2007 to look at internet behaviors of children and adolescents.
Okay.
And one of the things that came out from these interviews and from the research was this behavior occurring at nighttime and the sleep texting. Anecdotally, high school students and college students would say, sure, I do it. I know everybody does it. What's the big deal? But it was something I had not heard of before. And the concern was the memory. They have no memory of it. And the sleep interruption and the quality of sleep, because we have to value our sleep. And so that led me to do a very quick research with 372 college students. And sure enough, over a quarter of the sample report that they text while they are sleeping.
Interesting. So tell us about the research. Tell us about how you set that up and really what your findings were, because I think this is very interesting. I'd just like to mention that nurses are doing all kinds of research, and many people don't recognize that. They don't really think of nurse researchers. And in my practice, I've had many times to explain to very intelligent, experienced people what nursing research is all about. And I think that what you're going to be hearing as Elizabeth talks about her research is an example of the kind of research that nurses do and contribute to the health literature and to our understanding about how to intervene with various health problems, which we will get to in terms of sleep texting. But I'd really like to start with your research and tell us how you set that up and what you found.
So the question of the sleep texting, I hear about it from the high school students, the adolescents, and then because I teach at Villanova at the College of Nursing, I have college students, and I ask the college students, do you know anything about this phenomenon of sleep texting? And the response was, oh, sure, I do it. I dream about doing it. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so I created a survey, one-page survey, asking about sleep habits, asking about cell phone use, and asking about cell phone use while sleeping. And if that cell phone influenced sleep, if they felt it influenced sleep, where they put the cell phone when they are sleeping, how long the behavior had been done, really looking at an attempt to quantify the stories that students were telling me so that it would be understandable and add to our database, because we know with sleep is important. Sleep is a critical piece, and most Americans of any age don't get enough sleep. And here is the college student and the adolescent high school student who historically don't get enough sleep and have a well-earned reputation for not getting enough sleep, reporting a behavior that is interrupting what little sleep they get. So from a nursing perspective, it was really needed the research to identify what was going on, to look at the behaviors, and then step back and think about how can we better address the behaviors to reduce the behavior or the risk, and to impact and influence and improve the sleep. And that was the goal and remains the goal.
Good, good. Well, let me just point out one thing that makes this different. People can describe sleep texting, and that's what we're doing here in this discussion. But I think that the next step was what she used, the word quantifying, and that means to really measure it. How much prevalence is out there? How often is it occurring? And I think that's probably what you found. Is that what you found in your results?
Yes, that's what we found, is that out of 372 students, over 25% of them are sleep texting.
Now, were you surprised that that number was so high, or did you think it was going to be higher? What were your assumptions?
I was surprised that it was high. When I shared that with my students who had been part of it, they were surprised it was so low.
Interesting.
And so that says to me that either the questions didn't get at the root of what sleep texting is, or there are other avenues in how we have to define sleep texting.
Well, I think that's a very good outcome. So even with trying to measure it, there's nothing that's perfect. So even if 1 out of 4 people, young people, are sleep texting, it may be actually much higher than that. It also may be a range. Some people may be doing a lot of sleep texting, and maybe some people are just doing it occasionally. Maybe so occasionally they didn't even think it counted. But whatever, you have started to anchor that this is a pretty common experience among young people. So when you talked with your students about it and you shared your research, what were their comments in terms of, do they see it as a problem? What is their take on this?
The students that had the biggest problem with it would be the ones who started sleep texting when they were in high school. And so in high school, a student, an individual, is treated very differently when they're a high school student than they are as college. So that home, for the high school students, they had adults who were helping identify boundaries and put limits on it. Because the other finding that came out of this wasn't just about the sleep texting, it's where they put their cell phone. the overwhelming majority of individuals who sleep text put the cell phone in bed with them on their chest or next to their pillow. So it makes sense that if there's any sort of noise, they're going to respond to it, especially when we talk about texting. And the average adolescent and young adult texts anywhere between 50 to 100 texts a day. So that would be natural that that would spill into nighttime, especially if the phone is right there in bed. Students who had problems with sleep texting as a high school student had parents who encouraged or forced them to take that phone out of the bedroom. So they learned how to put limits and boundaries on it. The most interesting boundary was the story of the student who actually sleeps with mittens on her hands, and her mittens prevent her from being able to use her fingers to text back. Her roommate is also a student of mine, and the roommate shared that, and this was done in April, so she had been the roommate with the girl since August, shared she had no idea why her roommate wore mittens. She assumed the girl had cold hands, and that's why she wore mittens. It wasn't until she took the survey that she went back and asked about sleep texting, and the roommate shared that this was something that she did, and this was her means of controlling it because she couldn't turn the phone off, she couldn't mute the phone, and she couldn't move the phone. The phone had to be in bed with her.
That's interesting. So you don't really know if it was her parents that started that intervention of requiring her to use mittens. We don't know if she came up with that as her own remedy to this as she was trying to control her behavior. But the fact that she didn't tell her roommate may mean that she was shy about it. She felt maybe a little bit ashamed about it.
Right, and had identified it as a problem, so stepped in to make sure it didn't happen. I mean, the sleep texting is not a dangerous, or does not appear to be a dangerous behavior at this point, but it's embarrassing.
Right.
Because when they send these sleep texts, they're gibberish. They very rarely make sense. They're oftentimes inappropriate. So they'll get a text from someone who's awake saying, is chapter 3 on the exam tomorrow morning? And the sleeper responds back with, I want a pizza, deliver it. And the awake student will send a text saying, what? What are you talking about? And the sleeping student will respond, my feet are cold. Or they're texting weird, they're gibberish. And it's embarrassing. The concern is that this is the generation right now that's in college. But as they age and they have professional lives with professional phones, will they be caught into a situation where they are sending gibberish to a boss or to a client or to a colleague? And what will that do from the embarrassment? Again, not the danger piece, but the embarrassment.
Right. Well, that's all very interesting from a social perspective. But for those of us who have not been involved, at least to the best of our knowledge, with our own sleep texting, this does sound like a very unusual set of behaviors because we're not in that age group and we're not doing it. But I think what we'd like to hear, though, is what are the health consequences? How do you see this as something that goes beyond just being embarrassing or sort of an interesting phenomena to something that really is of concern?
And that's a great question because that is the motivation for doing the research in the first place. So we look at, and we had 372 college students. Well, college students don't get a lot of sleep. Mm-hmm. And we know that a lack of sleep affects memory, affects functioning, affects attitude and mood. And so when you're working with college students who have a lack of sleep already, and their memory for exams, their memory for clinical, for their memory for laboratory, whatever they are doing, and they've got a memory issue because they're not getting enough sleep, now we have the sleep texting that is influencing what sleep they are getting. And the memory, especially the fact that they very rarely remember doing it and are having to check their histories or a friend has to tell them about it, that's concerning, especially when we're dealing with also all the high levels of depression, anxiety, test-taking anxiety in this generation and at this college. Now we've got students who are not getting enough sleep, and that's affecting their moods, and that's affecting their learning, and that's affecting their health.
Do you think that the young people that you've been working with, they see that association, or do they just sleep text and then they're tired and cranky and they don't necessarily see the association?
I agree. I don't think they necessarily see the association because they've gotten into a pattern of, well, I'll get 4 hours today, but you know what, on Saturday I can sleep until noon and I'll catch up on all of my sleep debt. And that's what they think
Right.
will happen. But what we find from the literature and from hard science into sleep, your sleep deprivation or debt from Monday is oftentimes not easy or recoverable on Saturday or Sunday. And schedules, and when we have young adults and adolescents, young adults, and older adults, there's always the influence of alcohol, partying, drug use, all those traditional health risks that then combined with a lack of sleep add to a very potentially high-risk situation for an individual, because we find that sleep deprivation used with alcohol tends to, the individual will have a higher tendency to have a violent episode. So they're putting themselves at risk, not just for not doing well on an exam, but now for external factors or environmental factors. And that is, I mean, these are young people.
Right. So I think that's a really critical point. It's not just one behavior. It can be a whole complex of behaviors. And one thing adds to another, and then you get a very different profile. And then speaking of profiles, is there any way of knowing who's going to be at risk for this? I mean, are there differences between young men and young women? Have you been able to get your research down to, I don't know, about socioeconomic class or any variables that would really help our listeners to understand and to be more attuned to really understanding what's happening?
Well, at this point, the research survey indicated that it was more girls were having the sleep texting problem than boys, and girls were less likely to turn the cell phone off or the machine to mute or use one of those wonderful apps that actually puts the phone to sleep from 11 to 6 or midnight to 8 or whatever than boys were. Boys appeared to have an easier time either putting it on a desk, on a bureau, or away from them than the girls did. So I think that may be something that has a gender bias to it and that we need to look at. Also, I think that as we start to see cell phones, data-driven devices that can do much more than just send a call and receive a call, going into a younger generation. So 5 years ago, cell phones tended to be given to high school students. Now we're seeing they're going into the middle schools and even lower into elementary schools. So parents need to be really on top of being able to show that technology can have boundaries.
Right.
It can be turned off, it can be put to sleep. It doesn't have to be on the person's body.
Right. Of course, that depends on the role modeling that young people are getting when they watch their parents, who may be also addicted to their phones as well. So the profile is that as people become more accessible to all these toys and different objects that they can use, it really is a parental concern to really just take a look at that and decide what kind of limits you are putting on it. And that may not be easy to do. I don't know if you've talked to parents and do they have to like wrest the thing away, or do they have a nice casual conversation about it? What are your tips for parents?
Tips for parents is when you give a phone or any data device that has online accessibility, there are boundaries. There are parental controls, and there are means to show them how to use it. We don't give 10-year-olds a car.
Right.
A 10-year-old could say, hey, I can drive. I know I can drive really well. Well, you don't give the car keys to the 10-year-old. So here is this data device that has such boundless opportunities to be used to music and calling and all of that. Give it with responsibility and with limits. And then, as was said, and look at own behavior. Phones can start with many controls placed on them. And then as the child ages, or the needs comes to be, they can be expanded. They can be opened and move that forward. And think about that every time the phone is upgraded. External boundaries for children are there to help them understand what is dangerous, what is silly, and what is appropriate. External boundaries then become internal boundaries, and that's how we learn that we can turn this off, how we learned how to cross the street. We always look both ways because it was drilled into us. And for children with technology, that needs to be drilled into them also. There are boundaries. We as human beings control the technology. It does not control us. It's great to be accessible 24/7, but is that realistic when we're looking at sleep needs, we're looking at growth needs, and we're looking at developmental needs? as well as social and the academic outcomes, certainly in a college student population.
That's all very excellent advice. And I wonder if it really leads us to wondering what the underlying dynamics are. Especially, I'm intrigued with the idea that girls are doing this more than boys. And even though your research questionnaire probably did not get into sort of that deeper level, this was a first blush at looking at just those behavior patterns. What do you think, as a scientist, as a mother of teenagers, as a professor that sees a lot of young people day in and day out, what do you think are the drivers of this?
Well, I think that the research has brought out that girls, adolescent and young adult girls, their social piece is becoming more and more online. They go to Facebook, they love Twitter, they use it more and rate it as being much more important to them as individuals than boys of the same age group. Boys are still rating the face-to-face with friends, with family. They are not rating Facebook as important. They rate gaming online as important, but not the Facebook or the Twitter pieces. And so I think that's a sociological piece, that girls, especially adolescent girls and young adult girls, are very different than their male counterparts. So the girls are happy being in contact or being accessible 24/7 and don't want to miss something or want to be there for their friend who may or may not have a question or be in a crisis. Whereas boys are much more, I'm tired, I'm done, I'm going to bed, I'm turning it off.
Should we be surprised?
Right.
Well, that is fascinating because I hear two things. One is that from a relationship point of view, the girls really they always want to be on. They want to be accessible. They want to be caring. What I also hear that is really very interesting is that the boys are still enjoying face-to-face, whereas I would have thought the girls would have maybe wanted more of the face-to-face. But I guess what I'm hearing is that potentially they're willing to substitute lack of face-to-face for just being always available.
Well, and the face-to-face used to be the one-on-one. Well, now with your phone or on Facebook, it's 1 to 300,
right,
or 400,
right,
or 200. It isn't the one-on-one. Now it's everybody,
right,
and the circle of friends and the likes. Do you like this? Do you not like that? And I think that that is playing into that need to be constantly connected.
Right. I don't think that really we could get into all the nuts and bolts of this on this particular program, but I am definitely intrigued with how the young girls would see being on something that is electronic, that it doesn't have the warmth and the informal communication that occurs face-to-face, that they would see that as a substitute, that they would feel that they are getting as much reinforcement, positive social reinforcement from that, as they would if they were doing face-to-face. Sounds like it's hard for them to make that differentiation.
And I think it's part of development. I mean, I think that's really the growth and development as we move through our stages. That adolescent home is not as important as the friends and the autonomy and who am I? How do I define myself?
Right.
How do I see how do others really see me?
Right.
And that is certainly something in this culture that we have a lot of conversation about.
So in terms of the tips, it would seem that the tips really go beyond simply having time out from your cell phone, for instance, in this conversation. That the tips really have to have that deeper conversation between parents and their young adolescent children, or even younger, as you pointed out, in terms of how to communicate with themselves, with their parents, with their siblings, but then with the external world.
It's a wonderful place to start. And sleep is such an easy question. How did you sleep last night? We can all ask it. We can all talk about it. We all experience sleep.
Right.
And it's a great avenue to say, how did you sleep? Oh, what do you remember doing? How long were you there? Did anything come up? What's going on? And use that really as the gateway question to some other behavior issues that may or may not be going on. And looking at the fact that sleep is important. And that is something that we can control. We can control oftentimes when we go to sleep and when we don't go to sleep.
I like that, Elizabeth, because that's very practical. Being able to have that conversation just seems so natural. But I bet a lot of parents just skip over that.
Yeah.
There's so many other things to talk about that they wouldn't think about asking, how are you sleeping? But that seems like a good place to start, right?
Absolutely. I think a lot of parents role model bad sleep behavior. For many children, parent is awake when the child wakes up and comes down, and then when the child goes up to the bedroom, parent's still awake. So they never really see their parents sleeping. And parents, as adults in this country, we're not getting enough sleep.
Right.
So we also need to think about our own sleep as adults, not just our children, but our own sleep.
Well, I think that's a really great takeaway from this show, that this is really not just a conversation about young people that you may know, your children or your nieces, nephews, grandchildren. This is really about your sleep patterns. So this is a wake-up call for all of us to really pay more attention to our sleep. But I'd like to go back now, though, to the adolescents. What tips do you have for young people who may be not thinking about this at all? They're thinking of just the opposite. We talked earlier about how to make those associations between their texting behavior and their sleep patterns, but I think it would go beyond that. So tell us about the conversations you've had with your students.
Talking about technology, talking about being able to put that phone either on a mute or on a sleep, and moving it out of the bed, getting it off their chests or off their pillows and putting it on a desk or putting it on a bureau, especially if they're feeling they need sleep or if they're napping to catch up on their sleep. And talking about many apps are out there to help them be able to do that. And then docking stations, not having the docking station for recharging next to the pillow, having it elsewhere. College students are in a unique position because many of them are in dormitories and there's not a lot of space in the dormitory, but being able, if we start these behaviors as young adolescents, as they move into adulthood, they will be used to, oh, I put my phone over here to recharge, or I don't sleep with it on my pillow anymore. Encouraging them to check their histories, to encourage them, if they had a weird dream about sleep texting, take a look and see if you did it. But understand that at the end of the day, the main tip is sleep's important. You control technology. It does not control you. And there are times when you can turn the machine off and step away from it.
And that's okay.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I think that we've got a lot of people listening to this show who really have a lot of influence. We've talked about students themselves and how they can be more self-aware. We've talked about parents and the role that you can play. But you may be a teacher listening to this show, or you may be a school nurse. And I think that making that association between looking at some of the behavior of students that you're having difficulty with, or those that you think are cranky at school, it may be around a whole host of different issues that may be causing those behaviors. But you can also add sleep texting to that list and really, again, explore that with your students or your children in one way or another. I think that would be really very good. So in this show, I just want to recap that we've really been delighted to have Elizabeth Burgess Dowdell with us today, because she is definitely a national expert. Very few people are doing research in this area, and I want to really compliment her for the great work that she's doing at the Villanova School of Nursing in this field. But we've talked about sleep in general, just basic sleep 101. It is critical. Your sleep, your role modeling, and how you help your children to develop good sleep patterns, because it really does make the difference across the lifespan in terms of health and wellness. We've talked about sleep texting and what that is, how it works, why it can be a problem for at least 25% of the young people that were in the sample of the study of the research that Elizabeth carried out. We think it's probably higher because the students were reporting that they thought 25% was too low. So just based on that general feedback, we know that it's probably much more prevalent than that. So it's something we have to pay attention to it and at least know what it means. And then I think that the third point that we talked about were the various tips. How to really promote good sleep patterns, how to turn things off, how to just say no, how to know that limits are good, that to be accessible all the time, especially for these young girls who feel that they have to be on for their friends and family, etc., 24 hours a day, is unrealistic, and that is really taking a toll on their health. Having that deeper conversation is something that I think you can feel very comfortable in doing after listening to Elizabeth's advice that she's given all of us today. So I want to thank you again, Elizabeth, for educating us about a whole new topic that none of us really knew anything about previously, and I want to thank all of you that have watched this show. It's been great to have you with us. I'm glad that you were able to learn something today, and thanks again. Join us and have a wonderful day. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today and that the information will help you in meeting your health goals. Catch this program and other conversations on the website, drnancyrn.com. Or you can write to me as well. I welcome your comments and feedback. Thank you for listening and join us again. And remember, with health, all things are possible.